peeps, welcome to another video. Today it's part 2 of the Vogue 8825 sew along. Today we're going to be tackling the front portion of the bodice, so let's get started. Okay, so now that we've completed the skirt, we're going to start working on the bodice front and back. So what it wants you to do is reinforce the inward corner of each bodice front through small circle, clip to the small circle, and then make the pleats in the bodice. So there's a little circle up here that we need to stitch along the seam allowance just to reinforce that point, to then clip into it so that we can then manoeuvre this collar piece to do what we need it to do later. And then we're going to be making the pleats in the bodice. We've got the front bodice piece here. There are lots of different markings that you want to transfer. So these are where your pleats are going to go, and as you can see, the fabric is going to be pleated towards the front of the bodice. This is the built-in facing piece, which is going to get finished on this edge and turned under. We've got the small circle there that we need to mark so that we can reinforce the seams and then clip into that point. Got your standard notches attached, and then here we have a square and a circle, and this is where the ties are going to be put in. So I'm actually, what I tend to do with the pleats is just actually clip into the bottom pieces here and then fold them forward to meet, so that this notch meets this notch, and I don't tend to worry about actually marking all of that stuff in, because we don't need to sew up to those pleats, we just need to baste along the bottom of those pleats. So I'm going to do that. I want to mark the notch at the center, at the front of the facing here, and up at the top there I want to mark a notch in there so that I know where to fold that over, and I am going to put in this point with my friction pen. Okay, so I've just run a line of stitching at the 5/8 of an inch seam allowance along this edge here up to the point, and then pivoted and done it along here. It's probably about an inch each way, and now what I want to do is clip diagonally up to that point there, not through the stitching line but just to it. So the next thing it wants us to do is form our pleats along the bottom front edge. So what I've done with the notches that I've marked, I've started at the side edge and I've taken the first notch and then I've folded it over to meet the second notch and pinned it down. So I've done that all along the way along, and the reason that I started at the side edge and not the middle front is because I also put in a notch for where the fold on the facing is. So I'm going to show you how I've done this now. Okay, so this is the side edge of the other front bodice piece, and we've got the notches that I cut in there. Now if you looked at the pattern piece, the smaller circles were on this side and the larger circles were on this side. So the smaller circles were towards the side edge and the larger circles were towards the middle front. And what it wants you to do is take the small circle and bring it over to the large circle, like that. And then I'm going to pin it in place. And then move on to the next one. So it's the small circle, this is the large circle. Bring the small circle to meet the large circle. And pin. I hope I'm doing this right because I'm doing this through the viewfinder, so we'll soon see. And then the final one. So small circle, large circle, bring your small circle to meet your large circle, and pin. And then you should have one more notch, which is the front facing notch, which is how that's worked out. So there we go. So I've got my pleats all coming into the centre front, and then on this side they're all coming into the centre front. So I'm now going to baste those in place. I'm going to sew 3/8 of an inch from the outside edge, the raw edge, so that it's basted in place but it won't show up once we've come to complete the garment. Okay, so the next thing that it would like us to do is stay stitch the armhole edge of sleeve front between the small clips and notch. Personally, I don't do this because my fabric is stretchy and I want it to be able to stretch. If you had something that didn't have very good recovery, I could see the point in this, but mine, it has great recovery and does what it's told, so I'm going to skip that step. Now, this may be controversial, and if you do stay stitch your jersey makes, please let me know in the comments down below. I would love to know your reasoning and why you do it, if that makes sense. So anyway, okay, so the next thing that it wants you to do is step 3 and pin your sleeve to your armhole edge of bodice front, right sides together, matching notches to and small circle, stitch from side edge to the small circle using a double stitched seam. Press seam allowance towards the front, trim excess fabric as shown. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm only going to use a single line of stitching on this because I'm going to finish this seam on my overlocker a little bit later once we've got a bit further through the construction and have finished the back neck. But for now I'm going to pin it together from the underarm seam up to the small circle, which is the piece that we clipped into earlier. So I have my front sleeve attached to my front bodice and I've got it attached at the small circle there and on the back there, and then I've pinned it all the way down to the side seam, and I'm going to sew on my sewing machine to begin with. If you don't have access to an overlocker, you want to do what they've said here, so the 2 lines of stitching and then trim the seam down. Okay, so step number 4 is to fold the tie end on the fold line, right sides together, stitch leaving end with markings free and trim the seam allowance. So you basically want to form a tube and turn it the right side out. Press and baste the raw edges together. Personally, I don't worry about the raw edges, but if you would like to, feel free. So we're going to get our tie pieces and sew them together. Okay, so I have my tie piece here, and basically what it wants you to do is fold it in half so that the right sides are together and pin along the edge. And then this is the wide end, so you're going to sew at 5/8 of an inch from here up to here in pivot, and then sew 5/8 of an inch all the way down to the smaller end, which is here, and you're going to leave this open so that you can turn the tie out once you have sewn the seam and then trimmed off the excess. I'm actually going to sew this on my overlocker because it's going to trim all the excess off for me at the same time as sewing the seam. When I get down to this end, I'm actually going to sew off the edge here. I'm going to secure that one, and then I'm going to sew this edge here and secure these 2 edges and then turn this around. This worked for my black one because I was using a very lightweight jersey for that as well, and so that the points came out fine even with the bulk of having the overlocker thread going this way and then crossing over the top. I totally didn't mind the way that that turned out. You may wish to use a sewing machine and then trim off the excess because you prefer the way that that looks. For me, this works very well. Okay, so I've sewn down the long edge and came off the edge there, and then I started a new line of stitching to sew up the shorter edge. And the way I finish my serger thread tails is that I pull it taut, chop off the excess, and then with a fairly large needle, and I'm not going to do this through the viewfinder, I'm going to do this in real life, so if I go out of focus, I'm sorry. Thread the thread tails into the needle, and then what you want to do is bury that between the stitching that you've just done. Pull it through. Don't pull too tight because you'll end up with it making scrunching it up, but you want to finish that off like that and then trim off the excess. So you've got your thread tail buried in there, and this is how I finish all of my knit dresses that I sew on my overlocker, and none of them have come apart on me so far. I'd be really interested to see or hear how you guys finish your thread tails from your overlocker, so let me know in the comments down below. I'm going to do the same to this side now. So now we have the fun task of turning this the right way out. It shouldn't be too difficult, it's just going to be a faff and quite long because there is a lot of it. And there are my ends. So one down, one to go, then we've got to press them. And there's the second one. So now we want to press them. So you want to press the seam side, and then you want to press along the fold side so that you end up with a nice crisp fold pressed in there. Right, after lots of lovely pressing, we now have nice ties with crisp edges. So we want to attach these to our front bodice panel as per step 6 in our instructions. So it says, on the outside, pin tight ends to side edge of bodice front, matching large circles and squares, having raw edges even based. Now, I'm actually not going to do that. I am going to put mine in when I sew up my side seam, because I'm going to pin it loads and I'm going to make it behave itself. But what you want to do, so on the tie pattern pieces, the 2 squares indicate the bottom where the seam is, and the circle indicates the top where the fold is. So you want to make sure that when you're installing yours, you do it with the bottom seam, so the squares, towards the square at the bottom edge of the front bodice, and then the fold at the top. And it's going to be about just over 5/8 of an inch up from the bottom of the bodice, but I will show you what I do when I pin mine in and sew the side seams up. Okay, so step number 7 is stitch centre back seam of collar, which is one with bodice front, using a double stitched seam. Press seam allowance to the left side. So it's the front bodice pieces that we have here. It's this seam that it wants us to sew up. So this is where this sleeve, this is the sleeve, this is the bit that we clipped into earlier, and it's this edge here that it wants us to sew up, and it has 3 notches in it, so we want to match those notches up. Okay, so this is the 2 front bodice pieces. I've pinned them right sides together along the collar edge, and I'm going to sew that on my overlocker. If you don't have an overlocker, do the double stitch seam and trim as per the pattern, and then press this to the left. Okay, so I've sewn my seam allowance there, so you should end up with something that looks like this. So this is where the sleeve joins the front bodice. This is going to be the back collar, and then that's the other sleeve there. So if you have any questions at all, please let me know in the comments down below, and I will do my best to answer them. I really hope you've enjoyed today's video. If you have, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't yet, please subscribe, and I'll see you again very soon. Bye!